My name is Rebecca Keating, and I'm 29 years old. If you met me today, you'd probably assume I was born into money. I drive a late model Mercedes wear tailored suits that fit properly and own a growing chain of parking facilities spread across some of the busiest districts in my city. From the outside, my life looks smooth and inevitable, like success was handed to me early and simply kept compounding. It wasn't. I wasn't born into wealth. I was born into entitlement, just not my own. That role belonged to my older sister Kelsey, and it was assigned so early in our childhood that no one ever questioned it. I didn't either. I assumed every family had a favorite, and that ours just didn't bother pretending otherwise. Kelsey got new shoes whenever she wanted them, upgraded phones, and the bigger bedroom whenever we moved. I got explanations. I was told I was tougher, that I didn't need as much, that I'd be fine. When Kelsey decided she wanted to attend a private art school in New York, my parents dipped into her college fund and quietly into mine without asking. They framed it as temporary promise they'd make it up to me later and acted surprised when I didn't argue. They never did make it up to me, but at the time, I still believed effort would eventually count for something. That belief lasted until my grandfather died. Arthur Keating was the only person in my family who treated me like I mattered. He wasn't warm or sentimental, and he didn't hand out praise easily. He wore suits even on weekends, believed respect was earned, and built his real estate portfolio slowly, from a single corner store into a modest but valuable collection of apartments, commercial properties, and vacant lots in the right neighborhoods. He used to say land was the only thing they weren't making more of, and that real value was often hidden under neglect. We weren't close in a soft, affectionate way, but he respected work ethic, and for reasons he never explained, he respected mine. During my college summers, while Kelsey traveled Europe on my father's dime, I drove Grandpa to tenant meetings, climbed rooftops to check air conditioners, and listened while he negotiated leases. I didn't get paid and never asked to be. He asked for help and I showed up. Apparently he noticed. When he passed away, I was devastated. I had just graduated with a degree in finance and had quietly imagined building something alongside him one day. That future ended overnight, but I still held on to hope. Not for handouts, just for a chance. Arthur was meticulous about everything, so I assumed the will would reflect intention. I thought maybe he'd leave me something small, a single property I could grow into more. That's when the beach villa happened. We were summoned to his lawyer's office on a gray Thursday morning. The room was heavy with grief tension and something closer to anticipation than sadness. My parents sat rigidly, hands folded. Kelsey arrived 20 minutes late with sunglasses still on her head and not a single tear in sight. The lawyer, a wiry man named Mitchell, began reading through the will. I barely registered most of it until the words fully furnished beachfront property in Crescent Bay landed in the room. I looked at Kelsey and she smiled. The villa was hers, a wraparound balcony property in one of the most expensive coastal areas in the state, worth well over $1 million. I'd visited it once with Grandpa, and even then he'd called it an investment more than a retreat. Then Mitchell turned to me and said my name. I leaned forward, heart pounding, waiting. I leave Parcel 43B on Harbor Row, he read, unfurnished. There was a pause before I realized what he meant. Harbor Row was an empty lot. When I said it out loud, Mitchell simply nodded. My mother laughed openly and said, "Well, Rebecca, I guess you get to build something. That'll build character." Kelsey smirked and joked about lemonade stands, and the room chuckled as if this were all very funny. I knew that lot. It sat 1 block from downtown, close enough to matter, but ugly enough to be ignored, wedged behind a rundown nightclub and bordered by a storage facility and a trash-filled alley. Mitchell handed me a thin envelope containing the title transfer, a property map, and a copy of the will. There was no maintenance fund, no safety net, no buffer of any kind. As we left, my father patted my shoulder and told me I'd figure it out, that a place like that could be worth something one day if I was smart. My mother added that Kelsey had a real eye for design and that I wouldn't have known what to do with a villa anyway. I nodded, said nothing, and watched my sister twirl the keys to a multi-million-dollar mansion around her finger. That was the moment I stopped expecting fairness from my parents. Love, maybe. Fairness, never again. The next morning, I went to see the lot. It looked exactly as I remembered, cracked asphalt weeds, forcing their way through concrete broken glass near the edges, dumpsters, baking in the sun, and a neon sign next door, buzzing like it was dying. It was trash, unmistakably so, but it was mine. I walked the perimeter, mapped the sunlight, watched the foot traffic from the nearby club, and stood in the center of it trying to imagine what no one else could see. I didn't get angry. I got focused. That was where everything truly began. I came back to Harbor Row every morning for a week before I did anything else. No tools, no plans, just me, walking the perimeter, like the lot might tell me what it wanted to become if I listened long enough. I paid attention to things I'd been trained to notice during those summers with my grandfather. The way shadows stretched across the asphalt at different times of day, how long cars lingered near the nightclub before giving up and driving away where water pooled after it rained. This wasn't nostalgia, it was reconnaissance. The lot was ugly, but it wasn't useless. It sat 1 block from the edge of downtown, close enough that people circled it instinctively when they couldn't find anywhere else to park. The nightclub next door filled up fast on weekends. By 9 o'clock, cars were double parked idling in the alley, honking in frustration before leaving. I watched that happen twice on a Friday night standing across the street pretending to scroll my phone. By the third car that gave up and drove off, something clicked. I didn't have much money saved, certainly not enough to build anything glamorous, but I had enough to clean, enough to start. I applied for basic permits, rented a power washer, bought gloves, trash bags, and temporary fencing. For 3 days straight, I scrubbed oil stains out of cracked asphalt, hauled broken glass into bins, and dragged that suspicious old mattress into a dumpster. My hands blistered. My shoulders ached. No one offered help. No one even noticed. On the 4th day, I installed floodlights and a small kiosk I found secondhand online. It looked flimsy and slightly ridiculous in the middle of all that emptiness, but it worked. On Friday evening, I taped a laminated sign to the fence, event parking. $10, flat rate. I stood behind the kiosk with a folding chair, a lockbox, and a knot in my stomach, telling myself this was an experiment, nothing more. The first car pulled in at 9:07 p.m. The driver rolled down his window, squinted at the sign, then at me. $10, he asked. 10, I said. He handed me a crumpled bill and drove in. By the end of the night, I'd made $48. It wasn't impressive, but it was real. The next weekend, I made nearly $500. By the end of the month, I'd added clearer signage, painted rough parking lines, and partnered with a towing company to keep the lot clear when it needed to be. People stopped asking questions and started lining up. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Kelsey. There was nothing to brag about yet, and even if there had been, I wasn't interested in watching them dismiss it. Kelsey, meanwhile, was posting photos from her villa, sunsets, champagne glasses, white linen furniture arranged just right for social media. She visited the place twice that year, maybe 3 times. When she rented it out once, she complained endlessly about guest maintenance and how expensive owning real estate actually is, as if it were some cruel surprise. I kept working. By the 3rd month, I added a second kiosk. By the 6th, I was offering prepaid parking for concerts and sporting events downtown. I bought the alleyway behind the lot when it quietly went up for sale, then a small adjacent plot no one else wanted. One decision stacked onto another, each one informed by what I'd learned watching my grandfather work. I reinvested everything. No vacations, no upgrades, just steady expansion. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I met Ethan. He wasn't flashy, and that was part of what made him feel safe. He worked in logistics for a regional distributor, understood systems, understood patience. We met through a mutual friend, and when I explained what I was building, he didn't laugh or offer unsolicited advice. He asked questions. He listened. When things got busy, he brought me coffee and sat in the kiosk with me on slow nights, watching cars pull in like it was the most normal thing in the world. 3 years passed faster than I realized. By the time I turned 28, the parking lots were no longer a side project. They were a business. A quiet one, but profitable. I was earning more in passive income than both my parents made combined, and they still thought I was figuring things out. Kelsey's villa, on the other hand, was starting to show cracks, literally. Mold complaints, broken air conditioning, unpaid maintenance bills. She called once asking if I knew a good contractor. I gave her a number and thought nothing of it. I should have known better. Success doesn't stay invisible forever, especially in families like mine. It just waits until someone decides it's unfair. For a long time, my success lived in the spaces between conversations. It didn't come up at holidays because no one asked. It didn't show up on social media because I never posted about it. I liked it that way. The quieter things stayed, the safer they felt. My parents still spoke to me in the same tone they always had, mildly encouraging, faintly dismissive, asking if I was still doing the parking thing, as if it were a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. I let them think that. By then, Harbor Row was just the beginning. I owned 4 additional lots across the downtown district, each one chosen carefully. Each one improved slowly and deliberately. I learned how to negotiate with the city, how to read zoning language for what it actually meant instead of what it said, how to time acquisitions, so I never overextended myself. I hired staff who valued consistency over flash and paid them well enough that they stayed. I slept better knowing that my business didn't depend on constant supervision, just smart systems. Ethan moved in during the second year. He never tried to take over or claim credit, and he never made my work feel like competition. When I was buried in spreadsheets or out inspecting a new lot, he handled the quiet parts of life without complaint. Groceries, laundry. Late dinners reheated without resentment. It wasn't dramatic love, but it was steady, and after growing up in my family, that felt like its own kind of luxury. Kelsey, meanwhile, was still living as if the villa guaranteed her importance. She talked about it constantly when we saw each other, which wasn't often. She called it the house, the way people talk about institutions, not homes. She complained about taxes, about insurance, about how unfair it was that coastal properties required so much upkeep. I noticed she never offered to sell it. Image mattered more than math. The first real sign that things were shifting came the year I bought the lot across from City Hall. It wasn't big, but it was strategic. That purchase required permits, inspections, and paperwork that passed across desks my parents recognized. A week later, my father called me, his voice unusually warm. "Your mother and I were talking," he said. "We've noticed you've done quite well with that little property Grandpa left you." Little property, singular. He asked questions that sounded casual but weren't. How much traffic did the lots get? Was it stressful? Did I have partners? I answered carefully, keeping things vague, and when he suggested we all have dinner soon, I knew it wasn't just to catch up. The call that followed came 2 months later. This time there was no small talk. My father went straight to the point, saying they thought it might be time to reevaluate Grandpa's will. Kelsey, he explained, was struggling. The villa was expensive. The taxes were higher than expected. Meanwhile, my parking business had become quite valuable. It didn't seem right, he said, that I was thriving while my sister was under pressure. I didn't argue. I told him I'd think about it and ended the call with my hands shaking. 2 days later, a cease and desist letter arrived at my office. It claimed the will's intent had been misunderstood and demanded either a share of my profits or a return of the Harbor Row lot to the estate for redistribution. That was when Kelsey showed up. She walked into my office unannounced, dressed like she was stepping onto a red carpet instead of into a workspace. She looked around at the desks, the screens, the quiet efficiency, and frowned. When she sat down, she said she wasn't there to fight, just to talk like adults. She praised my success in a way that sounded more like disbelief than pride, then pivoted quickly to her problems. The villa was a nightmare, she said. Taxes, repairs, insurance, things I couldn't possibly understand. She asked if I really thought Grandpa had meant for her to be stuck with a money pit while I turned a parking lot into a gold mine. Maybe she suggested I could cut her in, for family. I told her the truth. She'd accepted her inheritance happily. She hadn't offered to share when the villa made her feel superior. Now that my lot was profitable, fairness had suddenly become a concern. When she accused me of being dramatic, I told her I was done. She left furious, promising I'd regret it. Within a week, the story changed. According to extended family, I was greedy, ungrateful, exploiting a loophole in Grandpa's will. Calls came in under the guise of concern, always ending with the same suggestion: do the right thing. I kept working. I kept quiet. But the ground under me was starting to shift, and I could feel something heavier coming. The first sign that things were about to turn ugly didn't come from my parents or Kelsey. It came from one of my lots. I pulled in early one morning to inspect a newly installed camera system and immediately knew something was wrong. Red spray paint slashed across the kiosk in jagged lines, sloppy and furious. Thief, family traitor, you'll lose everything. The words were large enough to be seen from the street, written with the kind of anger that doesn't come from strangers. I filed a police report more out of principle than hope. When I reviewed the footage later that afternoon, the image was grainy but unmistakable. A convertible with a custom vanity plate I'd known since high school. Kelsey's car. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls from my mother, 2 from my father. A voicemail from an aunt who said she was just worried about the family legacy. None of them mentioned the vandalism. They didn't need to. The message was already clear. At 11 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. My parents stood in the hallway like they belonged there, like they hadn't shown up unannounced to confront me in my own home. My mother stepped inside first. Eyes glossy voice, soft in the way she used when she wanted something. My father followed his face, unreadable. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," my mother said once they were seated. "Your sister is struggling. She's always been more sensitive." "She vandalized my business," I replied. My mother flinched but didn't deny it. She called it a mistake, an emotional reaction, something I should understand because I'd always been the stronger one. My father finally spoke, saying they just wanted peace, that I had more than enough and could afford to share. That word again, enough. I asked them why fairness only mattered now, why it hadn't mattered when Kelsey was handed a fully furnished villa and I was laughed at for inheriting cracked asphalt. My father stood clearly done pretending this was a discussion. "Then we'll see you in court," he said. They left without another word. The next weeks were a blur of pressure and disruption. Anonymous zoning complaints appeared out of nowhere. Inspectors showed up unannounced, citing violations that didn't exist or hadn't gone into effect yet. My permits were clean, but it didn't matter. The goal wasn't enforcement, it was exhaustion. Then the bank froze my primary operating account. Someone had reported suspicious activity triggering an automatic investigation. Payroll stalled. Vendors started calling. I spent hours on the phone being transferred from department to department, my voice getting tighter each time. I covered my employees' pay from my personal savings, but not everyone waited around. My head of operations quit without notice. Ethan tried to help, but there was only so much he could do. He watched me sleep less, eat less, check security feeds at 2 in the morning like I was waiting for something else to break. When another lot was vandalized, this time with smashed equipment and a dead animal left in the middle of the parking area, I started documenting everything obsessively. Dates, times, photos, emails, calls. The smear campaign went public shortly after. A local blog ran a story accusing me of exploiting my grandfather's legacy and bullying my family for profit. No sources, no evidence. Just enough insinuation to stain my name. An old family photo was cropped and captioned, "Wealth changes people." Contracts paused. Calls slowed. Meetings were suddenly postponed. One night after everything had gone quiet, I went back to Harbor Row alone. I stood in the same spot where I'd once sat on a folding chair counting crumpled bills. The lights flickered. Weeds pushed back through the cracks. For the first time since all of this started, I cried. Not loudly, just enough to let the truth settle in. My success hadn't made them proud. It had made me a target. But when the tears stopped, something else took their place. Not rage. Clarity. If they wanted a fight, I wasn't going to survive it by reacting. I was going to survive it by preparing. Quietly, thoroughly. And that was the moment I stopped defending myself and started building a case. The next morning, I stopped trying to hold everything together by force and started pulling it apart on purpose. If my family wanted to turn my life into a mess of accusations and pressure, then I needed to know exactly where every crack was coming from. Guesswork wouldn't save me. Proof might. The first thing I did was lock down information. I reviewed access logs, email permissions, internal documents, anything that could have been leaked or misused. It didn't take long to find the weak spot. My assistant had been forwarding emails she had no reason to forward, looping in addresses I didn't recognize, asking questions that felt just slightly off. When I confronted her, she cried, apologized, said she was overwhelmed and just trying to help. I let her go that same day. It wasn't personal. Trust once broken doesn't get a second audition. Next, I called Gabe. We'd been friends since freshman year, back when we both thought we had our futures neatly mapped out. He'd dropped out of college to start a digital forensics company, while the rest of us played it safe. At the time, I'd thought he was reckless. Now I knew better. When I told him what was happening, I didn't embellish or vent. I just asked one question. "Can you find out who's really behind this?" He didn't hesitate. Within days, he was pulling metadata from emails tracking IP addresses tied to anonymous complaints, cross-referencing timestamps from vandalism reports with phone activity near my properties. Patterns started emerging almost immediately. Burner accounts, temporary emails, VPNs that weren't nearly as anonymous as whoever used them thought. Every time a zoning complaint was filed, A device tied to my parents' household pinged nearby within hours. Every time a negative review appeared online, it traced back to the same small cluster of digital fingerprints. While Gabe worked, I tightened everything else. I moved payroll to a new bank. I hired a second security company quieter and more professional than the last. I rotated patrols, upgraded cameras, and stopped announcing anything in advance. No more warnings, no more visibility. If they were watching me, I wanted them guessing. I also went silent. I didn't answer calls from my parents. I ignored the messages from cousins pretending to be neutral. I didn't defend myself publicly or privately. Silence frustrated them more than arguments ever could, and I needed them emotional, not careful. A week later, Gabe called me late at night. I found something he said, and the tone of his voice told me this wasn't minor. He sent over a report that laid everything out cleanly. My former assistant had been communicating with a burner address connected to Kelsey's old event planner. Wire transfers traced back to a shell account funded from an account under my mother's name, the same account that paid the blog that ran the smear article. Security footage timestamps lined up with phone pings from Kelsey's device near my lots on the nights they were vandalized. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't emotion. It was coordinated. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry or afraid. I felt steady. What they'd done wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. And suddenly the narrative shifted in my mind. I wasn't scrambling to protect what I had anymore. I was standing on solid ground, watching them sink into the consequences of their own choices. That same evening, my lawyer Samir came over with a copy of the will I'd already read a dozen times. He'd flagged something I hadn't paid attention to before, a sealed letter referenced in the documents labeled simply, "For Rebecca, when the time is right." I stared at it for a long time without opening it. Whatever was inside had waited years for me. I could wait one more night. I placed it on my desk, made tea. I didn't drink and sat in silence, knowing that the next chapter of this fight wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be precise. I didn't open the letter right away. I carried it home, set it on the kitchen table, and left it there while the kettle boiled itself dry. For once, I wasn't afraid of what I'd find inside. I was afraid of how clearly it might explain everything I'd spent my life trying not to see. When I finally sat down and broke the seal, the paper inside was thin and yellowed, folded carefully as if my grandfather had known it would be opened in a moment that mattered. His handwriting was tight and deliberate, exactly as I remembered it. Rebecca. If you're reading this, you've already seen what I saw years ago. Sometimes the people closest to us can't stand to watch us succeed, especially when we do it without them. I didn't give you that lot because it was easy. I gave it to you because I knew you wouldn't quit. You see value where others see inconvenience. They will come for what you build. Let them. Then show them who it belonged to all along. Arthur. I read it twice then, a third time, letting the words settle into places that had been sore for a long time. It wasn't just encouragement. It was permission. Permission to stop explaining myself. Permission to stop hoping they'd understand. The next day, Samir asked me to meet him at a small cafe near the courthouse. He wasn't there to discuss filings or deadlines. He wanted me to meet Mitchell, my grandfather's lawyer, privately. Mitchell was older now, slower, but his memory was sharp. He stirred his coffee and watched me over the rim of his cup like he was deciding how much to say. Arthur anticipated this fight, he told me. Not legally, he'd done everything by the book, but emotionally. He'd worried they'd come after me if I succeeded. Then Mitchell opened his briefcase and slid a single page across the table. It was a note written to him years earlier. If they challenge Rebecca's ownership, remind them why I chose her. I gave her the land because she would build something real. If she does, it's because she earned it. Anyone who says otherwise wasn't paying attention. Mitchell hesitated before adding the part that changed everything. Kelsey had been offered the Harbor Row lot first. She'd rejected it outright, called it a rat trap, said she didn't want to deal with something ugly when there were better options available. The beach villa had been her choice. The lot had become mine only after she turned it down. I sat there quietly absorbing the weight of that truth. This wasn't about fairness. It never had been. It was about regret, about watching someone turn down the hard thing, then resenting the person who made it work. On the walk back to my office, I felt something lift that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I wasn't defending a technicality. I was honoring a choice mine and my grandfather's. That afternoon, I called a woman named Jamie, a documentary videographer I'd once helped secure parking for during a downtown shoot. She'd since built a following, covering urban development and small business battles with city politics. When I told her my story, not the rumors, the truth, she didn't interrupt once. "Let me film it," she said when I finished. "All of it. The lots, the records, the timeline. Let people see." I agreed, but on one condition. We wouldn't release anything yet. I wasn't ready to react. I was ready to finish preparing. Once the truth was clear, everything slowed down in the best possible way. I stopped feeling chased and started feeling deliberate. While my parents and Kelsey were still reacting, making calls, spreading narratives, pushing lawyers to apply pressure, I was planning 3 steps ahead and saying nothing. Silence, I'd learned, made people careless. Jamie and her crew began filming on weekends. No dramatics, no staged moments. She followed me through every lot, recorded the cracks in the pavement, the camera systems, the kiosks I'd installed. Over time, she interviewed former employees who remembered the early days, the folding chair, the lockbox, the nights I stayed late sweeping broken glass myself. She pulled public records on camera showing permits, zoning approvals, timelines. It wasn't a hit piece, it was documentation. Meanwhile, Samir went to work assembling something far more dangerous than a defense. We weren't just preparing to respond anymore. We were building a counterstrike. Gabe's digital evidence was organized into clean, readable reports: email, metadata, payment trails, IP addresses tied to anonymous complaints, video timestamps aligning perfectly with acts of vandalism. Nothing speculative, nothing emotional, just facts. Outside the courtroom, the pressure kept coming. Another zoning inquiry appeared, then quietly disappeared when Samir filed an appeal and attached proof that the complaint originated from a device linked to my father's work laptop. A potential buyer backed out of a deal after hearing concerns, only to call back 2 weeks later, once the rumors failed to stick. I watched it all happen from a distance, documenting, collecting, waiting. During that time, something else surfaced. Samir called me one morning with a tone I hadn't heard before, measured, almost impressed. He'd been reviewing public tax records related to the Crescent Bay villa. Kelsey hadn't been paying property taxes consistently, not just late, but skipped. Penalties had stacked. Notices had been sent, ignored. The property was edging toward tax lien foreclosure. Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't about justice or family unity. It was about desperation. They weren't trying to share my success out of principle. They were trying to save hers by taking mine. The villa wasn't just expensive, it was collapsing under the weight of neglect, and she knew it. I didn't tell anyone what I'd learned. Not Ethan, not Jamie, not even Samir at first. I just filed the information away like another chess piece and kept moving forward. I scheduled the court hearing to be in person. I approved the final cut of Jamie's documentary, but told her to hold it. We set a date instead, Friday night, 8 p.m., as a premiere. That same week, I quietly established a shell LLC through a trust Gabe managed. Nothing flashy, nothing traceable to me at first glance. I told him I might need it soon. By the time my mother left her 5th voicemail asking me to please just talk to us, everything was in place. The evidence, the story, the timing. They still thought this was a war of pressure of endurance. They thought I'd eventually fold to make the noise stop. They had no idea I was about to let the truth speak for me all at once and very loudly. Friday night arrived quietly. No announcements, no warnings. I made dinner with Ethan, turned my phone face down on the table, and waited. At exactly 8 o'clock, Jamie's documentary went live. Within minutes, my phone began to vibrate. The video didn't accuse, it didn't editorialize. It simply showed the timeline, the will, the lot, the work, the expansion, the complaints, the vandalism, the digital trails. Jamie let the facts breathe. She showed the Harbor Row lot as it was then, as it became. She showed permits receipts, footage side by side with the anonymous attacks that followed. And then, near the end, she revealed the detail that changed the tone of everything. Kelsey had been offered the lot first. She'd rejected it. By midnight, the video had tens of thousands of views. By morning, it had tripled. Business owners I'd worked with commented, publicly sharing their own experiences. Former employees spoke up. People who'd never met me defended the idea that effort mattered more than entitlement. The narrative flipped so fast, it felt unreal. Saturday morning, a full-page ad ran in the local business journal. The headline was simple: I was given a strip of asphalt. I built a business. Now they want it back. Beneath it was a short statement honoring my grandfather and a QR code linking to the documentary. No insults, no threats, just truth. My parents called. I didn't answer. Samir filed our countersuit on Monday morning. Defamation, business interference, malicious prosecution. Every claim, backed by evidence, affidavits, timestamps, and financial records. By Thursday, their attorney emailed, asking if we were open to discussion. We didn't reply. Letting them sit with the consequences felt appropriate. 3 weeks later, the Crescent Bay villa went to auction. Kelsey must have believed she still had time. Maybe she thought someone would rescue her. Maybe she assumed I'd never let it get that far. But the city didn't care about family drama. Unpaid taxes were unpaid taxes. When the auction date arrived, I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The LLC did. The winning bid came in at $832,000, less than half of what the villa had once been worth. When the gavel fell, I was sitting in my office reviewing camera footage from Harbor Row. I closed the file, leaned back, and let the moment pass without celebration. This wasn't revenge. It was inevitability. They didn't know yet. That came later. Mitchell arranged the meeting. One room, one conversation, no cameras, no lawyers speaking unless necessary. My parents arrived first tense and pale. Kelsey followed, looking smaller than I remembered. The confidence stripped away by exhaustion and fear. When Mitchell invited me to speak, I set a folder on the table and slid it forward. "This is a settlement," I said, "not a negotiation." They would drop their case. They would issue a public retraction. They would acknowledge the will's validity and their role in spreading false claims. In return, I would walk away from pursuing full damages. Then I showed them the final page. The villa was mine. Kelsey stared at the document like it might rearrange itself if she looked long enough. My mother whispered my name. My father tried to stand and was stopped by Samir's calm warning that threats were admissible. I gave them 24 hours. They signed the next morning. The fallout was swift and public, but it wasn't loud. That surprised me more than anything. There was no dramatic apology tour, no tearful press conference. Just a retraction printed in the same places where the lies had first appeared, written in careful legal language that acknowledged the will was valid and that the claims against my business were false. It said nothing about love or regret. It didn't have to. The truth had already done its work. Jamie followed the documentary with a short update video. It didn't gloat. It simply showed the outcome. The countersuit, the settlement, the consequences. That second video traveled even faster than the first. People shared it not because it was shocking, but because it felt fair. In a world full of noise, clarity stands out. I dismissed my lawsuit after the settlement cleared. The money covered legal fees and the damage they'd tried to cause, and I quietly donated half of what remained to a youth entrepreneurship program my grandfather used to support. No press release, no plaque, just a wire transfer and a thank you email I never replied to. Kelsey moved out of the villa in 28 days. I didn't rush her. I didn't show up to watch. I didn't touch a single piece of furniture she left behind. When she posted an angry rant online, blaming everyone but herself, it barely made a ripple. The audience had moved on. So had I. After she left, I walked through the villa once. It was beautiful in the way expensive things often are. High ceilings, polished floors, an ocean view that demanded admiration. And yet it felt hollow. Not empty of furniture, but empty of meaning. It wasn't a victory. It was a lesson. I put it on the market a month later. When it sold, I reinvested everything. Not into status symbols, but into infrastructure. Commercial properties, urban development projects, a mentorship fund for young entrepreneurs who came from families where character was expected, but capital wasn't offered. I built Harbor, a company that wasn't about parking anymore, but about turning overlooked spaces into something useful and sustainable. My parents sent a birthday card that year. It was unsigned, blank inside. I understood it for what it was, the only apology they were capable of offering. I didn't respond. Ethan and I took a quiet trip that winter. No photos, no announcements, just time. He never asked me to choose between my past and my future. He simply walked with me into the next chapter, and that was enough. Sometimes I think back to that envelope in the lawyer's office, to the laughter, to the cracked asphalt everyone dismissed as worthless. They thought inheritance was about what you were given. My grandfather knew better. He understood that real legacy isn't comfort. It's opportunity disguised as work. They gave me a strip of pavement. I built an empire.